You don't notice when the crack starts. It's not a sound, not a shift, just a stillness. A pause in a conversation that used to move like air. That was how it began with Grace. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even silence. It was something worse, a script she no longer needed me in. We'd been married for 9 years. Lived in a modest colonial outside Des Moines. One of those neighborhoods with identical mailboxes and annual potlucks no one enjoyed. I taught American literature at a community college. Grace was a freelance editor who wrote essays for parenting blogs, lifestyle columns, and lately, short fiction with a real-life edge, as she called it. For a while, our life was quiet. Predictable. We made a habit of bookstore Sundays and Thai food Fridays. But one night I came home from class, and she wasn't on the couch. The lights were on. Her laptop open. Dog half fed. I didn't panic. I just checked her location on Find My iPhone. A trick I learned back when we'd go looking for each other in packed grocery stores. It showed her on Maple Lane. My jaw didn't clench. My heart didn't race. But I knew one thing immediately. Maple Lane was where Marcus lived. Marcus had been my best friend since we were 12. We played baseball together. He gave the best toast at our wedding. He taught Grace how to parallel park in her old Civic when I couldn't. I had trusted them both completely. And maybe that's what stung the most. Not the betrayal, the precision of it. The way it had clearly been rehearsed. Because when she came home 2 hours later, she didn't smell like him. She didn't even smile differently. She just said, "How was class?" Like she'd never stopped being my wife. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Instead, I started reading the short story she'd printed and left beside the sink. It was about a woman married to a man who loved her in lowercase, gently, routinely, but never in italics. She described him as kind, quiet, and barely living next to her. By the second page, I knew it wasn't fiction. Over the next week, I mapped it all. Late-night writing sessions at his place. Muffled laughs through the vents when she thought I was asleep. Little lies disguised as self-care. I need time to reconnect with myself. It's part of a writing workshop. I'm researching new character types. She was researching me. And I realized, slowly, that her next book, a memoir disguised as novel, wasn't just her escape. It was her weapon. A story where I'd be the shadow, the background noise, the man who couldn't keep her attention. I didn't want revenge. Not the way movies show it. Broken windows, angry affairs, or courtroom scenes. I wanted something else. I wanted her to feel the exact thing she was doing to me. Erasure. I wanted her to live in the background for once. So I did what I do best. I studied her, and I started writing. Not a diary, not a confession, a manuscript. I called it Still Her Husband's Name. It wasn't a tell-all. It was a reflection of everything we'd built. Subtle violence of indifference. The way betrayal doesn't scream but shrugs. And unlike her half-drafts and metaphor-laced chapters, mine was clean, quiet, pointed. I wasn't going to beat her to publication. I was going to beat her at her own story. But I needed one more thing. Something she'd never expect. Her help. The next morning, I kissed her cheek and said, "I've been working on something. Would love your eyes on it." She blinked. "You're writing?" "Sort of a character study." She smiled, just slightly. Not with love. With curiosity. Maybe even guilt. "Sure," she said. "Send it over." And I did. But only the first 3 pages. The softest ones. The ones that felt like forgiveness. Because you can't burn someone unless they're standing close enough to feel it. And Grace? She was leaning in. She called me that evening. From the car, I think. Her voice had that strange brightness that always came right before a subtle cruelty. "I read your pages," she said. "They're quiet. But raw. I like the tone. Quiet. Raw. Tone." Grace always gave feedback like she was dressing a wound she'd made herself. Gently, but never apologetically. I smiled into the phone. "I've got more." "Send it," she said. "I want to see where it goes." Of course she did. Because she hadn't recognized herself yet. That was the genius of it. My version didn't name her. Didn't describe her hair, her laugh, or how she hummed Stevie Nicks while making coffee. But the shape of her was in every line. The main character, a man called Jay, wasn't angry. He wasn't broken. He was simply observing. Recording the moments that slipped between words. The pauses in shared dinners. The tension in texts that say "be back soon," but mean "don't wait up." Grace told me the writing felt like a breath being held. I wanted to say, "That's because I wrote it when you were lying beside me." But I didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I sent her 1 chapter at a time. Sometimes she replied with praise. Sometimes with notes, too much exposition here. Let the reader connect the dots more. And I thanked her. Even used some of her edits. Because that was the point. I wanted her fingerprints on this. Not for credit. For irony. One night, she texted me out of nowhere. Grace, it's good. You have a real voice. Maybe you should publish. I replied with a single word, thinking about it. She liked the message. Then deleted it 10 minutes later. I saw the notification. She didn't know I had alerts set for every change she made. Because when someone's trying to rewrite their image, the real story isn't what they try to erase. By month's end, I had a full draft, 90,000 words. Every chapter labeled as a month in the marriage. Each one more distant than the last. The final chapter wasn't a confrontation. It was a scene of the narrator walking alone into a public library, dropping a copy of his own book anonymously onto the shelf, then leaving without waiting to see if anyone would ever find it. I knew Grace wouldn't get the metaphor, but readers would. She invited me to dinner, said she wanted to talk about what's next. We hadn't sat together like this in months. She made risotto, lit a candle, played the jazz playlist we used during our early years. I knew what she was doing, trying to create nostalgia without ownership. She poured me wine. You've been different lately, she said. How so? Lighter. Focused. Like, you've got something of your own again. I looked at her, let the pause stretch, then said, I guess I'm just enjoying writing something that's honest. She didn't flinch, just nodded, as if we were both in on the same secret. Only we weren't, because I wasn't writing a story to get her back. I was writing one that made sure she didn't come with me. The next morning, I uploaded the manuscript to a submissions portal for a well-regarded independent publisher based in Vermont. No agent, no big announcement, just a quiet click. The working title, still her husband's name, under my own name, because it was time someone knew the truth. Not hers. Not the one she filtered through metaphors and blog posts. Mine. 2 weeks later, I got the email. Subject line, we'd like to talk. They didn't just want the book. They wanted a series of essays to accompany it. They said my voice was restrained, devastating, and impossible to ignore. Grace had used similar words, but this time they weren't a compliment. They were a signal. This story was mine now, and she had helped write it. She sent me a draft one Sunday morning. No warning, just an email titled, For Your Eyes First, Please Be Honest. Attached, a 75-page document named Fractures in Us. I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. The first line read, This is not a story about villains. It's about the space between love and silence. Grace had always loved writing things that sounded like wisdom if you didn't look too close. The story was a thinly veiled memoir. She renamed me Caleb, gave herself a poetic middle name, Elise, and told a version where our marriage fell apart because he was emotionally distant, slow to dream, and content in shadows. There was no mention of Marcus. No late-night affairs. No lies. Just a woman who had to leave to breathe. I scrolled through it in silence. She had even recycled lines from my manuscript, things she'd helped me edit, and slipped them into her monologue. Like they were hers now. Like her memory owned them more than mine ever could. I didn't respond right away. Let her wonder. Wait. Because silence, as she once weaponized, was now the rope tightening around her fantasy. That afternoon, I met with the editor from my publisher over Zoom. Her name was Rochelle. Mid-40s, sharp, funny, all business. We love the manuscript, she said. But there's more we want. Like what? We think this could be a real cultural piece. You're not the only one who's lived this. But the way you processed it, it's clean. It's precise. And it hurts without rage. That's rare. I nodded slowly. Then asked, what happens next? We're fast-tracking it. Soft release this fall. Print run in early spring. And a profile piece. With your name on it. A week later, the press release went public. Nothing massive, just a short announcement in Shelf Space Weekly. Debut memoir blurs line between fiction and confession. Still her husband's name explores the erosion of a modern marriage from the quiet center of it. Jacob Alden's voice is restrained, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I didn't post it, didn't forward it to anyone, but I knew Grace saw it. She messaged me 2 hours later. Grace, didn't know you'd finished it. I replied, you helped. Then muted the conversation. She called twice that night. I let them ring, then left the house.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing experience, but we really need your support, namely a subscription to the channel. which can make it possible to hire a professional voice actor and make the best content for you.
Drove to the river trail, parked in the dark, and sat on the hood of my car with a cup of gas station coffee. It was the same trail we'd walked the week after we got engaged. Back when love was still a shared language, not a game of interpretation. I didn't feel rage or satisfaction, just a strange, unfamiliar sense of stillness. Like walking out of a theater where the actors no longer remembered their lines. The next morning, I received another email. This one from a digital magazine where Grace occasionally published. Subject line, fact-checking request, piece by G. Alden. She was using my last name. Still, in her byline. Even now, I replied, politely, I cannot verify this story. It is a fictional account with no factual alignment to my experience. 20 minutes later, the editor confirmed it had been pulled. That night, I left a single copy of my manuscript, hardbound, preprint, on the bench outside her co-working space. No note, no explanation, just a simple act, letting her read the final version of herself, the one she couldn't edit, couldn't revise, couldn't twist. She never replied, but she never published her story either. And that silence? It said everything. Because some endings don't need punctuation. They just need to be the last word. The soft launch came on a Wednesday. No bestseller banners. No morning show circuit. Just a quiet link on a publisher's Twitter account and a half-page spotlight in Midwest Review under the title. Stories that stay with you. The photo they used was black and white. I wore a collar shirt I borrowed from my neighbor and smiled like I didn't know whether this was a debut or an autopsy. I didn't tell anyone at work, not even my department head. But 2 days later, I found a copy of the book placed in my mailbox at the college. No note, just a sticky tab on chapter 12. That chapter was about the night I realized Grace had rewritten the story of our marriage in her head before I'd even known it was ending. One of the adjuncts must have figured it out. I half expected a staff meeting full of knowing glances, but there were none. Just 2 casual nods in the hallway that felt a little too gentle. Grace didn't contact me, but she didn't change her last name either. That part stung in its own quiet way. She had rewritten everything else. The cause, collapse, the character, but she still walked around using the one piece of me the world recognized. It wasn't about romance. It was ownership. Even in absence, she wanted to be the story. But now, she wasn't. She was a chapter. Reader emails started coming through my publisher. Some long and painful. People who'd been cheated on and never got to tell their side. Others were colder, analytical, curious about the structure, the sparseness. One woman wrote, I left my husband 2 years ago. I read your book and realized I told myself I left because he didn't see me. But really, I just didn't want to be seen anymore. I read that line 3 times. Because that's what Grace had done too. She called it suffocation, but really, she was just tired of reflection. She didn't want to face who she was becoming. So she invented someone else. Someone who suffered more. Who deserved more. Someone who could walk away without consequence. I didn't throw that woman's letter out. I framed it. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. That truth isn't just what happened. It's what survives being told. 3 weeks after the launch, I saw Grace at a reading downtown. Not mine. Someone else's, a poet we both used to like. She hadn't noticed I was there. She sat alone. No ring. Dressed more casually than I remembered. When the poet read a line about the apology you'll never get, she blinked too hard and looked down at her knees. She didn't speak to me afterward, and I didn't approach her. There was nothing left to say. No conversation could compete with a page turned by someone else. That night, I walked home past the bar where we first met. The sign was half-lit. The windows fogged. Inside, couples leaned close. Pretending love was louder than the music. I stood there a while, not reminiscing, just witnessing. Because the past doesn't disappear. It just stops asking for your attention. When I got home, there was a package waiting. No return address. Inside was a copy of Fractures in Us. Her draft. Bound. Unpublished. The title crossed out in ink. On the inside cover, she'd written, You told the better version. And the true one. I see that now. Gee. I didn't smile. Didn't feel vindicated. But I did sleep that night. Fully, dreamlessly, without clenching my teeth. Because that was the moment I knew. I hadn't destroyed her. I'd just stopped letting her destroy me. The email came from a producer at NPR. Subject line. On-air invitation, modern memoir segment. They wanted me to speak about Still Her Husband's Name. A 30-minute interview. A quiet, thoughtful dive into betrayal, authorship, and identity. My heart didn't race, but something in my chest did that strange hollow tap, like a small knock from the inside, asking, "Do you really want this?" I reread the message 3 times before replying. "Yes, I'm available. Let me know next steps." It wasn't ego. It was resolve. Not for attention, but for closure. Because I needed to say it out loud once. Only once. The interview was scheduled in a studio in Chicago. Neutral ground. I took the train in, notebook in hand, and checked into a hotel I couldn't afford, just to feel slightly untethered. In the lobby, I saw a copy of my book on the free reading table beside a stack of The New Yorker. I didn't touch it. Just nodded at it, like an old friend you've already forgiven. The host was warm, easy. Her voice had that confident softness only radio people seem to master. She opened with, "Your book reads like a quiet reckoning. Was it meant to be read by your former wife?" I smiled. "The first draft, yes," I said. "But by the final one, it was meant for the version of me who never spoke." That seemed to land. We talked about love and narrative, how memory isn't static, and how truth, real, lived truth isn't a dagger, but a lens. Then she asked, off script, "Do you still love her?" I paused, not out of hesitation, but calculation. Did I? Not in the way we mean when we ask that. But in a way, yes. I still loved the woman she pretended to be, the woman I thought I married. That version had never betrayed me. So I answered carefully. I loved the part of her I carried long after she left. But I finally put it down. The episode aired 2 weeks later. I didn't listen to it live. But Grace did. I know because she texted me. For the first time in months. "Grace, you didn't make me the villain. Thank you." I stared at the message for a long while. Then replied, "You made you." I just wrote it down. She didn't answer. And that was the end of our dialogue in every sense. The publisher wanted more. More essays. A speaking tour. Even a guided reflection workbook. Whatever that meant. I told them no. I'd written the truth once. That was enough. Truth doesn't need a sequel. Instead, I took a part-time teaching gig in a small town in northern Minnesota. Cold. Quiet. Honest. In my first semester, I taught a course called Narrative and Memory. On the first day, I told my students, "Writing isn't about telling the story you lived. It's about uncovering the one you silenced." One girl raised her hand. "Do you mean, like, therapy?" I smiled. "No. I mean survival. Some days, I still think about the alternate version. The book she never published. The story where I was silent and safe, and she was a flame trying not to burn out. Maybe in that version, I stay in the background forever. Maybe in that version, I never write a word. But I did. And that truth, simple, unsensational, unbitter, is what saved me. The snow came early that year. I watched it pile outside my new apartment window, tea cooling beside me, my phone face down. No alerts. No posts. No headlines. Just the quiet of a man who had nothing left to prove. Not even to himself. Spring came late in Minnesota. The kind of spring that creeps in under the door at night, melts the edges of the snowbanks, then disappears by morning like it regrets arriving too soon. I hadn't been back to Des Moines in nearly a year, but I got a letter, yes, a real letter, from a neighbor named Lyle. Older guy, used to walk his terrier past our house every morning. Inside was a photo. My old house. The one Grace and I lived in. It had a new coat of paint now, pale green instead of blue, and a new couple on the porch laughing over coffee. On the back, Lyle had written, "You made it a good home. Just figured you should know it's one again." I stared at that photo for a long time, not with regret, with relief, because that place no longer felt like mine. And more importantly, she no longer lived there either. But I still had one drawer left full of her. A small wooden box I kept in a closet, full of things I wasn't sure why I'd saved. A menu from our honeymoon cafe in New Orleans. The hospital wristband from when her appendix burst. A note she once wrote during a thunderstorm that said, "I only feel safe when you're the one watching the lightning." I burned them, one by one, not out of anger, out of mercy, because some things deserve to be remembered, and others, they deserve to be freed. I drove to Des Moines in silence. Didn't text her, didn't call anyone, didn't plan to stay long, just long enough to stop by the lake where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. The picnic bench was still there. Carved initials still faint in the wood. J plus G equals? That had always made us laugh. The question marks. Like even the knife wasn't confident we'd make it. Turns out, It was smarter than we were. I sat for a while. No script in my head. No speech. Just the wind. Just the rustle of leaves that had survived a bitter winter. And I realized. That's what I had done too. Not triumphed. Not conquered. Just survived. With honesty intact. A woman walked by with a young boy, maybe 5, 6. He pointed at my bench and asked something about the carving. She smiled and said, "Old love stories." The boy nodded like he understood. And maybe, in some way, he did. Before I left, I took out a pen and wrote 3 new letters beneath the carving. I am. It wasn't a name. It wasn't a claim. It was a sentence. I am. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I never saw Grace again. I heard she moved to Asheville, took her maiden name back, started leading writing workshops on emotional truth. That's fine. That's hers. This, the life without her, the peace without narrative, the morning tea without anxiety, this is mine. Some people say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Revenge, real revenge, is warm. It's soft. It's the silence of no longer needing a witness. It's waking up and not rehearsing the pain. It's telling the truth once and never needing to repeat it. If you ever find my book on a shelf somewhere, read it slow. Not for scandal, but for stillness. Because that's the real ending. Not applause. Not punishment. Just a man standing alone. And not needing to be anything else.
What do you think of the story? Write in the comments.